Space is big. Really big. You just wouldn't believe how mind-bogglingly big it is. I mean, you may think it's a long way down the road to the chemists, but that's just peanuts to space. This quote is from Douglas Adams from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in its entry on space. Let's start with a few facts about traveling in general. It takes 8 minutes and 17 seconds for light to travel from Sol to the Earth, a distance of 1 astronomical unit, or 1 AU, and the speed of light is roughly 299,792.5 kilometers a second. The current Crusader map in Star Citizen is 1 million kilometers by 1 million kilometers by 200,000 kilometers. So to travel from one boundary to the other, it would take light 3.335 seconds, or for the fastest ship in Star Citizen, 16.7 seconds. I mentioned the Crusader map. For those who don't know, or maybe have not realized, the Crusader map released in Star Citizen's Alpha 2.0 is roughly half of the orbital space near the gas giant Crusader in the Stanton star system. This may seem like a lot of space, but that is, as Mr. Adams has pointed out, peanuts. We know that the fastest quantum drive in Star Citizen is said to be 20% of the speed of light. So a ship equipped with the fastest drive should take 41 minutes and 25 seconds to travel 1 AU. Okay, that's a long time for a game, but that's a very, very short stellar trip. No, really, it is. A decent trip, say from Earth to Terra, is 4 jumps and 42.06 AU. For light to make this trip would take 348 minutes and 24 seconds, or just short of 6 hours. At 20% of that speed, that's 1,742 minutes, or just over 29 hours. That is only slightly longer than the 40 AU trip from Earth to Pluto, which involves no jumps. If you wanted to travel from Gliese 4 to Tries 1, that would be 238.02 astronomical units, or about 5 times as long as the previous trip. So just short of a week of travel time. Solid. No breaks, no fuel stops. Yes, CIG can adjust these values. Maybe an AU in Star Citizen isn't a full AU. Maybe it's a 5th or a 10th. But these trips would still not be quick, and that's as it should be. Traveling in space is not a thing to be done lightly. Traveling on Earth these days is simple. Most of the surface has been surveyed, photographed, and posted on the internet. There's even a game about it called GeoGuessr. But space is so vast and so empty that mapping it, cataloging, and confirming information would take thousands upon thousands of years, which is part of the fun. Okay, so I've talked about distance. There's a lot of it. But there are a few other aspects of travel I haven't spoken to, fuel being the first. Right now, in the Crusader map, all quantum engines use fuel at a rate of 1 unit per kilometer, and they travel at 0.2 the speed of light. The Aurora MR has a quantum fuel supply of 10 million units, meaning it can travel from one end of Crusader to the other 10 times, which at this time is a good amount. But in the galactic scope, wouldn't allow you to fly from the Earth to Mars without having to stop for fuel. Now, don't get me wrong. I know that the fuel rates, tank size, and speeds will all change before launch. However, for a first pass, this is an interesting data point. From this data point, we can use some things that we know about coming features to talk about the future, even though we don't have firm numbers. We know that there will be different quantum engines, with different speeds, different fuel usage rates, and probably even mass limits. For instance, that 20% of the speed of light engine we used for time calculations earlier is the fastest quantum engine around. It will probably burn more fuel per kilometer, or AU depending on the scale, than any other, and have a lower mass limit than others in its class. You'll more than likely find quantum engines that trade speed for the ability to carry much more mass than others, or use less fuel. Each will have a trade-off of not getting you there as fast, but at less of a cost or with more profit on board. So while traders will probably opt for a slower, more fuel-efficient quantum engine, pirates, bounty hunters, and combat pilots will probably opt for faster, shorter-range engines so that they can get ahead of their targets or get out of a bad spot fast and run hard. With the ability to mount and tune equipment for ourselves, the developers are not forcing game players to select one option. Want to kit out a Hull A for speed and smuggling? Stick a fast quantum engine on board and fly. Want to use a Cutlass as a long-range cargo ship? Stick a low-speed but much more fuel-efficient drive on there and go to town. Need to escort a slow Hull D, but you only have an M50? Put on a slower drive and you'll probably be able to go much further on the limited fuel capacity you'll have, and you'll still be able to stick with the ship. The next topic to discuss about traveling is navigation. Navigation is one of the things we know the least about right now. While we do have the arc map, we don't know how much of that information will be available in-game. We also don't know how much of that information will change. However, there are things we can keep in mind for now. Fuel, as discussed above. How far can we go before we need to refuel? Do we know where reputable stops are along our route? Do you know which planets you can stop by and refuel if you have the ability to process fuel on board the ship? Do you have a fuel ship in your group so that you only need to stop as a group and refuel as you go? Another navigational concern is safety. Does your route take you through pirate-controlled areas? Is it off the generally known or generally safe routes? Does your route take you in a route that your escorts will be able to follow? Does your route go through an asteroid field? Why does your route go through an asteroid field? Most known routes have two options, one with less jumps and one with less distance. As of right now, we do not know for sure if making a jump through a wormhole will use fuel. Jump fuel has been mentioned, but that could also be another reference to quantum fuel. If that's not the case, then you will need to consider that as well. I mention this here mostly because at this point, it's more of a navigational concern than a fuel. I'd say the last consideration to take in a discussion on travel is time. I've mentioned the time it takes previously, but here I want to talk about it on a different level. I want to talk about the difference between player time and game time. Up until now, I have been talking about a player doing this work. However, we know that players will also be able to hire NPCs to fly and crew their ships. There's also been discussions about being able to hire NPCs or other players to independently operate your ships, such as flying goods from Earth to Terra and then unloading them for you. With this in mind, you then have to think about your time. Do you not have the time to play, but have goods that need to be transferred? Do you trust your NPC crews enough to allow them to make the trip without you? Is it then worth the time you would sink into the ship and risk associated just to send a ship of NPCs to do the job? For now, all of these questions we don't have an answer to, but they're good things to keep in mind when considering travel.